Well, good afternoon, everyone who's online. My name is Ewan Ferguson, and I'm the facilitator for the second webinar on aerial firefighting, being run by the National Aerial Firefighting Strategic Committee. Just at the outset, I've got my mask on, but I'm actually at home alone. But just a reminder to everyone, if you're in a room with other people, you've got an obligation to wear your face mask and to practice social distancing. Just for ease of speaking, I'll de-doff my face mask. I'd like to recognise the traditional owners of this land that we meet on, which is, and bearing in mind this webinar has participants from across Australia and also overseas. But we recognise the traditional owners, we recognise the impact that recent fires have had on their land, and we pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. This is the second of 3 webinars, which will be followed by an interactive workshop. The first webinar was held 3 weeks ago on the 23rd of July. We heard from Chris Arnold and from Matt Blasinski. And at that webinar, Chris really challenged the listeners with a question as to what does tomorrow look like? And that's a recurring theme that we need to keep in mind. The overall objective of these webinars is to create a direction and a vision for what tomorrow might look like for aerial firefighting. Today we have the industry view, which is a really significant view that the fire industry values and continues to respect. We've got Phil Hurst, CEO of the Australian Aerial Application Association, or 4A, and Captain Ray Cronin from the Australian Helicopter Industry Association. We had 189 people who registered for today's workshop, and that's a really good outcome. So obviously the content of the workshops and the webinars is going to be shared amongst a lot of people. And then in 2 weeks' time, on the 3rd of September, the third webinar will be held, and that will look at the results of the survey of end users, the Royal Commission inquiry findings, and recommendations for the future. Richard Alder will be talking about the survey. Josephine Sterling from NAFC will be talking about diversity in fire aviation. Vicky Campbell from the Rural Fire Service in New South Wales will give a local incident controller's viewpoint. And Stuart Ellis will commence the discussion around the development of a national aerial firefighting strategy. And then that will be followed on the 27th of September by an interactive workshop, which will be an invitation-only affair, mainly because we need to manage people in the virtual environment. Just at the outset, I'd like to note that this webinar will be recorded, and after the webinar, we'll give you the link to access the recording, as was the first webinar recorded. We'll hold all questions until after the speakers have finished, and then we'll go to the chat box to respond to your questions. So if you just remember, if you've got a question, to put it on the chat box, and then we'll revisit it. The first speaker this afternoon is Phil Hurst, who has been the CEO of 4A for over 20 years. Phil has overseen the growth of the association and its programs to cover almost all operators, pilots and supporters of aerial application and all issues across agriculture and chemicals, firefighting, safety, regulatory reform and business management. Phil has driven a cultural change across the industry with the support of members and the 4A board through programs such as Spray Safe, the Professional Pilots Program, the Aerial Improvement Management System, and the 4A Standards Operations Manual, safety research and training, and most recently, the 4A Chief Pilots course. Phil brings a wealth of industry experience on issues He's been a former political advisor, an environmental manager, a volunteer leader, a sponsorship raiser, trainer, and PR and crisis manager. And it gives me great pleasure now to introduce Phil Hurst of the Australian Aerial Application Association. Thanks, Phil.
Well, thanks very much, Ewan. We'll just deal with some technology issues here to begin with, so I can share a screen and give you a few insights into what our side of the industry thinks about a whole range of issues. So hopefully you can now see that screen and we can share it from here on in. We're very much involved in continuous improvement. There's absolutely no point in our view of just repeating the same mistakes and hoping for a better outcome. So we have to engineer that, and that's certainly something we've been doing over many years, being deeply involved in cultural change and with continuous improvement. Just at the start, so everyone knows who Forays is, Aerial Application Association. We've been around since 1958, so we're not a newcomer to this. And if you look at the current NAFC fleet, we represent all of the fixed-wing bombers, seats, that is, a lot of the air attack supervision platforms, some of the air obs, and many call when needed aircraft. We cover both fixed-wing and helicopters as well. And they're all Forays members. We control a lot of the aerial application through our membership in the country. So we always offer ourselves as a one-stop shop. We're not a paper organisation. This is what we actually do. So you can have a quick look at our program tree and you can see it's everything from safety and emergency response right through to industrial relations, small business programs and so on. So there's a lot going on in our association. We're not just a paper tiger. Let's move immediately. This is a presentation in two parts. We had this presentation ready to go in November of last year when a strategic get-together was postponed due to the fire season we were having. And of course, since then, we've been overwhelmed by COVID-19 issues, and this is what we're now really focused on. So the two parts of this presentation will be COVID-19 and also then looking at some of the longer-term issues that obviously haven't gone away, but we've had to put them on the back burner for the moment. COVID-19 to us is a very dynamic environment. And as we know that the more dynamic the environment is, the more you have to communicate. Unfortunately, we've seen a drop-off in communication levels in firefighting agencies and with NAFC and industry over the last couple of months. We're looking to remedy that as quickly as we can. Obviously, we base everything we do on risk assessment, innovation, communication, but the cross-border issues are now really testing us. We've seen changes on almost a daily basis. We've seen more changes overnight in some of the states. So we're really following that as best we can and communicating with our members. We're clearly looking at aerial fire-based management with COVID-19 as being a particular vector risk. We recommend to NAFC that we establish a joint aerial firefighting task force based on the two associations and NAFC. And we're really looking at NAFC for providing some leadership and information sharing across all the agencies. I mean, a few of us were on a New South Wales RFS briefing yesterday, which was terrific to get that information and level of engagement. We really need to up the ante in this if we're going to conduct fire operations during a COVID-safe environment. Some strategic issues, I think, is that we do have an advantage of being able to offer additional aircraft on aggressive initial attack this season to try and reduce vectors between large numbers of ground crews. So I think strategically there is a very, very strong recommendation for aircraft use in addition, perhaps even in greater numbers than we have previously done. I think some of the issues we're coping with or trying to cope with really call up the NAFC contracts and particularly the template contract as to whether in the current environment, and I'm not being critical of NAFC because this is very fast moving, but are the current contract templates fit for purpose? So things like force majeure, the CPI adjustments, contract price revision, hardship. There's a lot of issues in that that really are going to test the patience, I think, of everyone over the coming season. Obviously, the border issues have led to severe restrictions of movement of aircraft. We're doing our best to cope with them at the moment. We are doing some political representation work to try and get the bubbles along the New South Wales and Victoria and New South Wales, Queensland borders extended. to cope with some issues they've created locally, but also just to aid the simple movement of people and personnel. The essential service status is critical. I can't underscore enough to NAFC, and I know they've done some work with putting on ARENA a template, to permit free movement of interstate crews especially. We really need to nail this essential service status issue as best we possibly can. That also applies to international movements crews coming in and Australians coming back. We actually assisted a few Australians get overseas for a season. We've now got to get them back, and that's going to take some effort on everyone's part. Those are the first lot of strategic issues, fairly high level. Then we've got some specific COVID-19 vector control issues. We're thinking that the relationship of incident management teams to air crews and other company staff is going to be a critical exposure. We have to manage that well. It's not enough to say that's industry's problem and hand it over to a COVID-safe company. We must focus on how we integrate the air crews, the suppliers, and the incident management teams on any campaign fires we have. We suggest, 4A suggests, a complete ban on non-contracted companies turning up to fires in the hope of getting work, the tow trucking that we've seen over the years. It's an uncontrolled vector. We really need to step up our vigilance to see if we can control these vectors. We think consideration should be given to replacement of agency volunteers with company loader mixers who are within the company COVID-safe bubble. It's a clear vector issue. We can control it. This is how we normally do agricultural work. We think it's a critical process that we need to look at. And of course, strict control of all others who might have a bright idea of wanting to visit a base. Obviously, we can't do without our suppliers, maintainers, but there's some other hangers-on, auditors, regulators I've even heard wanting to do ramp checks over the next season. This is utter uncontrolled nonsense. And we really need to get a strong message to CASA and others who are thinking of sticking their bib in to just cool their heels until we can get COVID-19 under control. Let's move to the tactical. Obviously, how aerial companies might be integrated once they've all got COVID-safe plans. And I just want to give a very strong message to all operators. You must have a COVID-safe plan. This came from NAFC yesterday. You must have a COVID-safe plan if you're going to be doing aerial firefighting this season. We also think there's some real opportunities to introduce some innovation. Why not a traffic light system for standby crews? So rather than having them hanging around a hangar or hanging around the aircraft or at the fire base, put them on a traffic light system so that we know that if we get the amber light, we've got to be on 15 minutes or 20 minutes, whatever the number is. But we think there's a system there that can be introduced to help us with that. We think that immediately single point hot refueling should be confirmed for all aircraft, but particularly fixed wing who currently don't have it in some states. This is to aid pilot isolation. We've already explained to a number of agencies the importance for maintenance reliability and not having to do hot starts on turbine aircraft. So we think this is a sensible step forward, or in some cases a step back to what we used to do. We think there needs to be an acceptance that there is going to be maintenance exposure as a vector, and we need to control that. We've got some suggestions on how to immediately underneath, but it may also mean parts delays. International parts are going to be suffering delays simply because of the time to get them. There aren't the number of aircraft flying across the Pacific to get parts out of the US. So we need to be aware of that. We're doing the best we can from an industry point of view to increase inventories and to control that risk, but it is still a possibility. And just in answer to the maintenance exposure, perhaps greater flexibility to take aircraft home for maintenance to reduce exposure of doing field maintenance work might be another issue, because then at least the maintenance crew would be in the same safe bubble, as a COVID safe bubble as the air crew. So we think those are some of the tactical issues. If we move now to our focus onto actual air crew in the immediate sense, we think a key risk is fatigue management considerations. We know we've got to do it, we will manage it, but we just need to be aware that those crew interchanges do introduce a COVID-19 risk. We think one answer is return to home base wherever possible each night, if we can manage that. Clearly accommodation only in COVID safe premises. There are meal management issues. We just need a discussion around this, but we know it's a risk. And one that's perhaps not obvious is that the mental health management for pilots in isolation, particularly on campaign fires, is going to be an issue. Normally, the crew room is a happy place to talk about what happened during the day, to think about better ways of doing things, to share information and knowledge. We need to be aware that with COVID-safe environments, we may be missing some of that letdown period for pilots and crew. So we need to be thinking about how we're going to manage that issue over the season. So in summary for the coming season, this is the first part of the presentation wrapping up. We know that communication needs to be ramped up. It needs to include 4As and AHIA, and we would really like to see that through a task force approach from NAFC. COVID-19 is going to put a layer of complexity over everything we do this coming season. So we need to be always thinking about safety first and keep that at the front of our mind. Just so you know that 4As isn't sitting on its laurels, we've running our continuous improvement program again this season. We ran it last season with great success, and we invite all of our pilot members and operator members to report any issues they see where they think there can be an improvement. We can then identify it and pass it on to the relevant agencies or NAFC or whoever. Like everyone else, we're awaiting the Royal Commission and the New South Wales Inquiry report released to see what's in it for us, if there's any lessons to learn or things that we should be doing. We're moving our training online as best we can. Very difficult to do CRM training when you can't get the C together. We're looking at at how we can do that effectively online. We want to build on our positive relationship with NAFC and the agencies, and clearly we have ramped up communication with members. We've got a very good communication system with members, and we can get out to over 250 members very quickly. So there is that capacity to communicate effectively. That's the overview of COVID and what it means for us in the coming 12 months. And I think there's some longer term issues mixed in there as well. There are some key documents available. Our 4A's AHI National Aerial Firefighting Policy is available on our website, as are our submissions to the Royal Commission and our response to a Royal Commission notice for information. So if you can just go to that website, you'll find that information freely available. Let's move to some long-term issues, and I'm sorry that this is just a skim across the top. We just don't have the time available to deal with a lot of these issues in depth, but I'm going to skim across the top as best I can. These are the issues that don't go away. These are the issues that stay here season in, season out. It's got to be a government-industry partnership, and I think that's a starting point for looking at how we manage our relationship. It's a partnership approach. We need an open dialogue, and we're very comfortable, very positive with the dialogue we've had with NAFC and AFAC and the agencies through the strategic committee that we've met with on one occasion face-to-face and a few other discussions. So we think that's a good thing. We strongly support the national strategy for aerial firefighting. It's in our policy since last year. We strongly support that development. Procurement and ownership remains a bugbear. We are firmly of the view in industry that the best place, the most effective place for the tax dollar is looking at a partnership with industry so that we can actually have a longer term relationship and we can work together to build up the Australian domestic capacity to whatever we need. We look at research, it's got to involve industry. At the moment, research in this space takes place without industry largely and without much communication back to industry. And I think, yes, there's a lot of research that industry itself does, but there's some other research capability that needs to be applied that actually takes the same partnership approach for involving industry. We've got some real issues with CASA on training pathways, but also on the general training pathways for agency staff as well. We think we can do a lot of good in that space. Quality assurance and continuous improvement systems, I will talk about a bit. It's a key recommendation of 4A's to the Royal Commission and to others that these systems are missing. They are actually required on the NAFC side in the NAFC contracts, and yet there is no system to deliver either of these functions. So we need to look again at the fitness of those contracts and the backing systems that may not currently be in place, but certainly need to be, so that we can ratchet up our performance to continuously improve. I won't get into detail here. There's a lot of short-term problems that can be fixed. Some of them have been raised with the Royal Commission. Some of them are agency practices. I don't want to paint everyone with the same brush here. We need to be aware that some of these agency practices only exist in one jurisdiction. We need to work with the individual jurisdictions so that we actually get some very good resolutions, which are easily available to a lot of these issues. So there are some short-term problems. The key operational issues really haven't changed over many, many years that we've been involved in this. We need earlier advice of tasking, earlier tasking onto the fires while they're small, aggressive initial attack. Those are key issues that can make a real difference. Launching aircraft as the last possible resort into conditions that are not favourable have consequences. And I think people need to take on the issue that the aircraft needs to be used when it can do a really, really good job. Don't throw us into the washing machine at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and then be surprised that we struggle. There's a whole bunch of opportunities in that space. Again, hot refueling, favourite subject of mine. We think there's an opportunity for improved transparency of arenas so taskers can actually see more detail about the aircraft that they're looking at. That information is all provided at the tender stage, doesn't seem to make it onto the screen when you're actually looking at which aircraft can do the best job. And that's really what we're on about, the best job for the task at hand. I won't bog you down in training issues, but there's a bunch of training issues relating to CASA. We strongly support the abolition of the aerial firefighting endorsement. We think it's a nonsense. It's been a nonsense from day one. It was safely done by operational training by the operators before CASA got involved and before, to be blunt, NAFC encouraged them. We make no bones about it. It is a ridiculous outcome and it's better handed back to industry where it was before 2014. We've done a lot of work jointly with AHIA on specialised training under Part 61 reforms, and we'll be continuing to push that as best we can over the coming months. We note there's some changes to the leadership of CASA coming. We look forward to working with whoever the successful candidate is to actually clean this up once and for all. Research, and I focus your attention on the bottom of the screen, $88.1 million in research announced fairly recently. I know that's going to all disaster relief, but surely there's some money in there to do some work on aerial application research for firefighting. We think there's some good research topics, whether it's out of aggressive initial attack, predetermined dispatch, getting the right tool for the right job, so on and so forth. There's plenty of research activity we could do that would really help us inform the agencies, but also help inform NAFC and industry. There's a lot we can do in this space, not just for safety issues, but for performance issues. And that's something that we highly recommend to NAFC to work with us on, dare I say it, getting hold of some of that money and doing some good with it. We're getting near the end, so bear with me. Quality assurance and continuous improvement is a mouthful. The key issue here is systems. Our aerial improvement management system is absolutely built on this concept of systemizing the way we do things, ratcheting up performance and outcomes by having a system for continuous improvement. It still amazes me that we have no national system on aerial firefighting for continuous improvement other than what the companies, and believe it or not, the associations are able to deliver. We want to work with NAFC to get that happening and get it happening quickly. Quality assurance, we don't have enough feedback on the fire ground. We don't have enough feedback happening on a regular basis from the agencies to the contractors or vice versa. We've got to ramp up our communication efforts to improve this feedback so we can all improve. We need simple, robust systems. We have a lot of experience in doing this in industry. We're happy to share that with NAFC. A just culture is critical, and this is a broad brush approach, so I'll stick with it. Culture is critical. We need to ensure that when someone says something to improve whatever is at hand, it's not immediately taken as a fundamental criticism of the way we do our work. We are trying to improve. That's to be encouraged, not to be shot down. So make sure that whenever you're talking about continuous improvement, you also talk about a just culture. There's some low-hanging fruit. The training pathways work with CASA is immediately available. It's still happening as we speak. We can start on feedback loops and quality assurance immediately. We can start on continuous improvement. 4A's already has a system. We're happy to share how we do that. We think the Joint Aerial Firefighting Task Force is absolutely critical to everything we do. That's the low-hanging fruit, and that's our starting point. So the final message from us is consultation. We can integrate our efforts and we can multiply each other's benefits, but it's all based on us continuing to talk and continuing to consult. Get to us early, talk to us often, and that'll make us all better performers. So thanks very much. Sorry for the burst. Happy to hand back to the facilitator now.
Thank you very much, Phil, and well timed as well. And there's a lot of really good, bitey detail in what you've presented. So thank you again, Phil. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Captain Ray Cronin, who's the President of the Australian Helicopter Industry Association. Captain Cronin is one of Australia's most experienced helicopter pilots and instructors. He holds the record for being the longest continuous serving helicopter chief pilot and helicopter chief flying instructor in Australia. Captain Cronin has had first-hand involvement in pilot training syllabus development to all licence and rating levels and has been an advisor to CASA on safety and training issues. Captain Cronin is a delegated flight testing officer. He currently holds the highest qualification available in Australia for CASA. He also holds a diploma in air traffic services achieved through his services to CASA in the late 1970s. As Managing Director and founding owner of Kestrel Aviation, Captain Cronin has led Kestrel to today being one of Australia's most capable helicopter firefighting companies with a record of continuous innovation and leadership in the field with over 27 years of contracted service to both national and state agencies. And in particular, in January 2018, Kestrel Aviation became the first Australian-owned helicopter company to obtain night firebombing trials approval in cooperation with CASA. As well as being President of the Australian Helicopter Association Industry Association, Ray is a foundation member of the Aviation Safety Foundation of Australia. It gives me great pleasure now to introduce Ray Cronin, President of the Australian Helicopter Industry Association. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you very much. So again, welcome to everybody who's participating in the background and for your time. And thank you to NAFC for the opportunity for the helicopter industry to give its perspective. I will apologise in advance if I'm treading on some toes with some of our presentation, but we are here to give a candid response to what we see as the industry perspective and the perspective of the members who give us constant feedback. And in doing and saying what I'm going to say this afternoon, we do unreservedly support the local industry. However, we do acknowledge the contribution, the significant contribution that foreign operators make to this arena, and thank them very much for their support as well. Now, as those who know me well know, I'm heavily invested also in some of the foreign operators who come into the country. So I support everything that Phil says. It's a hard act to follow, but we are fully supportive of the 4As. They're a much more mature organisation than what the AHIA are. The AHIA has been now under its new banner for about 5 years, and it's run by, we have a CEO who's part-time and the rest of the board are voluntary participants. We have the second largest rotary fleet in the world outside of America, and for that we have a very significant broad cross-section of helicopter activities. One of the really important sectors is the firefighting sector, and we really want to see that continue to grow on really solid grounds that is going to help our industry into the future. So I'll go on right on the back of what Chris Arnold was saying, and his vision was, what does tomorrow look like? Well, I think one of the really important things that we've got to acknowledge, if tomorrow is going to look anywhere near sustainable and solid and be strong enough to handle what the environment's throwing at us, is we've got to build on the Australia First principle. And this is where possible. And we'll talk about the fleet a little bit as I go along. But we have to build Australia's capability. We've got a great capability now, and there's great opportunity to build on that with the partnerships, as Phil said. It's not up to one association or a collective of operators. It is a joint cause that we all need to be following with NAFC and the member agencies. And this is to protect our sovereign risk. There is a very real sovereign risk that's absolutely highlighted currently by the COVID situation. We still don't know, and Phil's just come up with a checklist on what it might mean to us this season. We don't really know yet. I'll cover it a little bit later on. We don't even know whether ports are going to function in the next few months. So bringing in aircraft from overseas, we know there's a significant fleet that will come by water. We don't know what that's going to mean. We don't know what delays we're going to face, what access we're going to have to the ports. So these things are going to probably be with us into the future now. Until we get a handle on a vaccine for this COVID, how many years are we going to be doing this? 5, 2, 10, who knows? So we have a sovereign risk right now. We absolutely right now, we cannot instantly build up our fleet. We should have been working on this, we've gone part way there, so we'll talk about that. And it brings on to my next point, which is the fleet ownership transition to date. We've been in this game over 27 years, and a lot of other people have been in similar timeframes, and we've seen the fleet transition from nearly all foreign-owned aircraft that were operated here under discrete AOCs to now a significant in-country capability that stays in country. So what used to be moving from one hemisphere to the next, chasing seasons, that's stopping because the seasons are merging. And that's my point there. When we started in this game, we were lucky. There was a 90-day contract. You'd be lucky to be working for half of that. The rest of the time you're sitting around looking at green grass. That's changed. That's absolutely changed. We're now operating somewhere between 7 and 8 months. So the season has got a big span. It's the opportunities to work with foreign operators and moving machines and get earning income on the other side and in the other hemisphere is really dissipating. And that's part of a sustainable future that we need to look at and think about. The pandemic is throwing obstacles at bringing equipment in, as we talked about. The other thing is too, Australians, we've proven this in every war theatre that we've been part of. The Australian people and Australian ingenuity is absolutely incredible. And we're on par with the Kiwis. The Kiwis call it pioneering. We call it innovation because we're a step ahead of them. But it's really important that we don't stifle that we bring it into our backyard and we develop our own systems. We don't just have to keep using the same stuff off the shelves that operators find as an easy course. We and other operators in Australia have carried out some incredible innovation on our tanking and delivery systems. Okay, so our fleet composition and the sustainability of it is really an interesting look. The Type 1s, the S64s, the Chooks, the CH47s, then go down the capability a little bit into the Blackhawks, Pumas, are really the potential growth areas. The reason these are the growth areas are that we are getting more intensity in the fires. They're getting hotter, they're getting more aggressive, and we need more capability. There's still good capability in the Type 2s, but we need to be looking to develop this area. The Type 1s are really important. And some other components of the Type 1s that are emerging, like the Black Hawks and Puma, and particularly the Black Hawk in its speed, is its cruise speed, its ability to get to the job very quickly. We're talking, instead of 120 knots, 150, 170 knots. So that's significant in percentage of increase in speed to get to the fire quickly. So how do, and back on, and still on those, the Black Hawks and the Pumas are now becoming affordable to the Australian companies. To look at outlaying $30 million for an S-64 is not a practical option for an Australian company, because the seasons and the demand of use of that is not long enough, and the out of season use is very small. So local ownership of the Black Hawk and Puma category, and there are other aircraft types in those. I haven't listed them all because it would have gone on, but it's now becoming very practical. And we should be supporting and fostering the development and the purchase of those aircraft to be operated by Australian companies to stay in Australia, or operated in partnerships with foreign companies with the eventual outlook for those aircraft to be locally owned and operated. It's difficult, and I'll talk a bit about Chris's discussion on ownership and procurement, and who should own stuff and not own stuff. But it's very difficult for a government entity to own a restricted category aircraft. So typically, governments will only really want to get involved in ownership of brand new aircraft, new airframes and stuff that's under 20 years old. That's fine, that's great. It'd be great if we all could afford that. But the fact is, the legacy airframes, which are the ones pulling all the weight at the moment in the field, in the Type 2 area, the 412s, 212s, 205s, UH-1Hs, they are all fantastic aeroplanes, utility aircraft, have great R&D behind them. They need to stay, we need more of them. However, we still need to encourage the development and purchase and operating history and experience of these Type 1s. I think there's still a place to import the bigger, to try and partnership to bring in the larger category Type 1 airframes, and I think that's a logical and affordable and an efficient way to use those airframes. So to promote the Australian operators' investments, it's going to be a partnership thing. We need NAFC and its member agencies to get on board, start talking about what they need, what they want, what they see the future is, what contracts might be available, and where you can offer some incentive for people to take that leap into those higher capital items. One of the things we are seeing is that there's an increasing void appearing between the rates that are paid internationally for EU exclusive use contracts in the US and the length of their contract periods. They're typically, ours are 98 days, so on average, they're normally getting somewhere around 130 to 160 days, and the income's about 25% greater than ours. So there's a void there, really concerns me. We've got other issues, which I'll address in the next slide, that are affecting our viability and our sustainability, and it really concerns me if that area is threatened at all. I support Phil's comments about communication and relationships. I think the relationship it has its ups and downs. We're always working for a common cause. There's no doubt about that. But one area that we do lack is that regular exposure, and we really think that's very, very important. I think we would support a much stronger contractual background to encourage investment and reinvestment back in companies' fleets. We think the days of the call-when needed market to support the surge capacity is one that is a thing of the past. It will take time to transition, but contracts will support development of this industry further. The industry has a wealth of experience which is often ignored and untapped. We want to see that communicated and back in with the agencies. We've got a lot to offer. It's not going to cost you anything other than to sit down and currently to sit in front of a screen. You don't even have to catch an aeroplane. The competitive nature of operators will drive innovation, and it has done. And the operators are quite often well ahead of the agencies. And the operators now, one classic example of that is the operators have, some operators have initial attack night approval from CASA now. It can be used right now. We can go out and fight fires at night that we haven't touched before, but the agencies aren't there yet. So the industry is very responsible, it's very responsive, and it will accept the challenge when you throw it out there. I also join Phil's call for the national standards. There's a lot of variable standards out there in the field, you know, from flight duty times. We've got people operating on FRMSs, which are a great guess. No one knows what the FRMS conditions are, so they basically can do what they want. CASA has 48.1, Appendix 5A, Appendix 5.1, all of different appendices. We should be all singing from the same hymn book so we know when someone's stepping out of line. And the spontaneous call to arms versus a planned call to arms, well, we know the benefit of that. I mean, it's been proven in aviation time and time again. You need to know what you're doing tomorrow. Just snapping your fingers and demanding a task to be carried out, an urgent task, is not a good way to launch an aircraft or to carry out an aviation activity. Training, I'm going to speed up a little bit because we'll run out of time, but training is really a thing that I don't think we're doing well enough. I don't think we're jointly doing this well enough. Some areas are absolutely fantastic. But normally it's a pre-season agency briefing like we had yesterday from RFS, very comprehensive, but we're not interacting in the field with any actual activities. It'd be great to see some physical training, you know, being carried out. COVID's going to put a little bit of dampener on that, but let's look to the future as Chris's vision. An operator pre-season training, we are flying aircraft. Most operators are flying aircraft. They have flying training programs. We have some minimal agency interaction, but we've got a fantastic opportunity to put an air attack platform over the top of a bomber and get that fresh air attack supervisor some real experience before we go in and attack the fire in reality, in the real environment. So some great examples of good training, the DELP rappel training that's carried out in Victoria. I'm sure New South Wales do the same with their winching activities and their RAF teams. Also, the night training program that was carried out by Emergency Management Victoria a couple of years ago, absolutely fantastic. Great outcomes from all of those things. So I think we need to, just in short, we need to build up on these training opportunities. There's opportunities in the contracts and the NAFC contracts that go largely unused. We should be using those hours to actually benefit the outcomes for the industry. Thanks, Kerry. Okay, the challenges for sustainability. We have lived with, for over the last nearly 10 years now, consistently low exchange rates. It means the Australian operators are paying a lot more for their parts. I mean, this can mean hundreds of dollars per hour per aircraft. The insurance market has just gone berserk. Both peak bodies are trying to address this, but largely there's not much we can do about it. The market's driven from London, but the insurance premiums for a lot of companies have gone up between 300 and 500% in the rotary field. I understand it's not that large for the fixed wing, but the rotary's gone up. I think the minimum's 150% and it's up, way up in some sectors. That might shut some operators down and that's not going to help us. Freight costs have gone up. We're paying fuel levies for freight. It's just on and on. The regulatory costs keep going up and up and up as CASA invent ways of trying to fill their 15 million deficit. Competition from foreign operators is eroding some of the local operators, and you know, it's free trade, but we still need to look after our backyard, and those foreign operators are earning greater incomes than what the Australian operators are, and are able to come down here on a short-term opportunity to take funds away. We don't begrudge them being here from time to time. We want to limit that to where we really need those assets and leave the locals to do the other work. The risk of foreign dominance, if you like, if we end up at that stage, is that the people who invest heavily in Australia in the local industry will get worn out. And the message that, and Chris did touch on this last week, was you know, the looking at the viability of agencies operating and owning aircraft. We're seeing some of that happen now. From our membership point of view, it's seen as a very large threat, and it's eroding their ambitions to invest in the future, because they see they'll only be here picking up the scraps. So we need to address that. We need to talk about that. We need to engage with NAFC. We need to engage with the member state and actually point out what that is doing to our industry sector here. Thanks, Gary. Okay, what works and what can we improve? I'm going to really move through this very quickly because I don't want to really get into these operational matters, but PDD works. PDD works absolutely. It's gold-plated. I can tell you from our experience with PDD, it's cut our flight times by 1/3. So it means we're getting in there, getting in quickly, getting the job done. We need to be successful with PDD, you need contracted platforms that are in an elevated state of readiness. That's really important. You call when needed doesn't work. It doesn't guarantee you the outcome. Effective training programs, we talked about that. We need to retain the balance between experienced and inexperienced people in the field. We're seeing too many experienced agency staff being sidelined and put in other tasks because that's the policy of the agency. We really, NAFC needs, we need dialogue on this, because we've got some really experienced guys that have been moved sideways and they're no longer available. That's an important balance we've got to keep. One thing we supported through the Royal Commission was the swarm for the East Coast, a well-trained, a swarm of aircraft, which includes Type 1s, LATs, all of the fleet mix that can split into two groups, but are a crack team that can start it up the top end in Queensland and work its way down and eventually dissolve into the contracted fleet in the southern states. And we would support more science on the delivery system so we know what works and what doesn't work. At the moment, it's a bit hit and miss in that area. Thanks, Gary. COVID-19, I'm going to go through this, Phil, very quickly. Phil covered it very well. We know it's going to be very inefficient. We're doing some work on it at the moment and it's looking really, really costly. We're going to have to suffer spontaneous stoppages when people suffer symptoms. That'll take the whole team out. We're going to need much more coverage of crew. So you're going to have flight crew on very hefty salaries sitting in isolation and quarantine waiting to come back online. We're going to have less crews willing to come across international borders and domestic borders. We're having trouble internally with approvals. We've got to work on that seriously. That's a partnership thing that we've got to work on. Agencies, we need your help on this. The operators do not have the political persuasion to deal with this. Major increase in the logistics and costs, is going to be slow. You turn up, we support what Phil says. We've got to control the amount of people on the playground. We can't have anyone unnecessary on an airbase. We're going to suffer district lockdowns. That means crews aren't going to be able to come out or go in. the call when needed for the larger aircraft this year, I think is not practical. It's not going to happen. Who's going to want to come out here and sit in quarantine to crew up a Type 1 on a chance of getting called? I think the agencies need to seriously look at what fleet you need and communicate that to industry in the next weeks so that we can get some supplementary contracts established before the season starts. Who knows what the vaccine timeline is? It's going to cause a lot of problems. But at the moment, we're dealing with what's ahead of us, and we have to assume that it's as serious as it is in Victoria as in any other state. Thanks, Gary. Okay, last but not least, don't leave the room. On the safety issue, really last season we saw really 4 seasons in one, so that magnified the outcome. We can see easily where the holes are and where the cracks are in the system. It's easy to say safety, and it's a lot harder to achieve in a dynamic fire environment. We've got a lot of emotions we're dealing with. We've got a lot of visual information being seen by the crews in the field. We feel and see the stress. But one question we really put forward is, when is enough enough? You know, why, and Phil touched on this, and it's a real chestnut of mine as well. We're going out there on days that we shouldn't be out there. Do we need to introduce breakpoint targets like 40-40? If it's 40 degrees and 40 knots, let's all sit down, go back home and wait for it to calm down. We're not effective, and we're likely to hurt someone. And we saw that last year. There's accidents and incidents last year which we really don't ever want to repeat of. And it takes a lot of work to keep on top of those. And as Phil alluded to, culture is the primary way that we control the outcome, the culture of the organisation, and it's culture of the partnerships between agencies and the operators and the bloke at the pointy end of the cockpit. We can't wait for the pilot to be the last form of defence. He's up there, he's trying to make decisions, but he's got a lot of influencing factors on his decision making. A lot of that can be just the principle of engagement, like being a call when needed. He knows he's earning his company a lot of money, so he's got to stay out there as long as he can. If he's on a contracted model, that urgency is removed. It becomes important, not urgent anymore. So we need to look at that. When this is a partnership deal, we can't solve this in one. We can't leave the responsibility just to the pilot and command. He has to have a lot of tools and a few gates to help him out. So when the gates are shut, he goes home. That might be the 40-40 principle. And then we go, look at the risk of significant change from the air operator. We've got to look at those important things. And if we're talking about agencies buying their aircraft, you've got to compare that. To be really frank and very clear about this, you've got to compare that to an operator that has 30 plus years of experience and has built up that culture and developed it. You can't buy that. You can't just instantly set up an aviation operation and think it's going to work. At that point, I'll leave it back to the facilitator, Ewan, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ray, and thank you for your timing. If you stay with your video on, and if I could ask Phil Hurst and Richard Alder and Chris Arnold to put their videos on as well, we'll just go into a couple of questions, and there are a number of questions that have come in during the presentations, and I'll just work through those first. Some of them are highlighting issues, but we'll put them to the panel. The first was from Tim Zagaris, who is saying we need to learn lessons from California and the US in relation to COVID-19. I think that's a really good point. We need to learn, particularly the fact that the fire seasons are opposite each other. Ray and Phil, have you got contacts in California who you're getting feedback from already?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I'll jump in before Ray. Yes, we do. We monitor international operations in firebombing just like we do in agriculture and other sectors. So we are seeing some of those issues evolving with answers. And this just highlights my point. If you haven't got a system that supports a learning culture, then you don't learn. If you haven't got a system for continuous improvement, then you don't improve. And this is one of the fundamental challenges that industry is now looking at. Why have we got, for example, contracts that talk about improvement, but we have no systems backing them from either the agencies or for NAFC that will actually deliver continuous improvement? And of course, learning, a learning culture, a learning outcome is a key part of resilience. If you want resilient companies, they have to be learning, but you have to support them with the systems. At the moment, individual companies and individual industry sectors have both a learning culture and the systems to support them. We'd welcome sharing that with the agencies and with NAFC at any time.
Thanks, Phil. And Ray?
The only feedback we're getting, Ewan, is inefficiencies. Everything's much, much slower than it was, moving people around, spares around. The air bases are slow, are dysfunctional in part. Just general slowdown is what we expected.
And I might just move to Richard. Are there processes in place to pick up lessons from US and California in particular?
Thanks, Ewan. Yeah, absolutely. And look, can I just quickly take the opportunity to thank Ray and Phil for their presentations, obviously putting some challenges out there as we'd expect, and we appreciate being challenged on some of those things. Obviously, we have some different points of view on things as well, and we'll continue to work through those. In terms of learning the lessons on COVID, yeah, absolutely. We're closely liaising with our North American counterparts, both Canada and the US. We've received quite a bit of material from the US just over the last few days, which we need to analyse and understand. It is conscious of Phil's suggestion about working through this together. Absolutely, we agree with that. It's just a question of finding the best structure and best way of doing that, so that we're not just on another Zoom teleconference in a changing environment. But certainly, we'll be sharing all the information we get, and we look forward to sharing the information that the industry has as well.
Thanks, Richard. Heather Simpson has posted a question, perhaps a statement, but I'll get Ray and Phil to respond to it. She says, the high risk exposure is in the pilots. And if we're looking at more aircraft in the system, how are we going to address the increased exposure to pilot safety? Right, Phil, did you want to respond? Right.
Yeah. Thanks, Ewan. Thanks, Heather. It's a good question. In part, I disagree with your statement. That the pilots are the highest risk. The pilot is sitting at the pointy end. Yes, I agree with that. But part of the presentation I made is we can't be reliant on the pilot alone to be the final point of defence. There's a lot of support mechanisms can be put in place to keep that pilot safe, to help him make right decisions, or help that person make the right decisions and land when it's appropriate and be out there when it's appropriate. And when it's effective. When it's not, we shouldn't. Training program, succession management is something that I had in the slide, but I actually had to accelerate a little bit. We have been speaking to the agencies very closely about increasing or putting a second pilot in some of the single pilot aircraft so they can develop the skills on the job. That's what we need. We can train and train and train and train, but we've got to put them on the job where it's hot, dangerous and dynamic. That's where we really get the win. So yeah, you're right. We have got people. We are oversubscribed to flight crew. I can tell you, as a company alone who's invested heavily in the industry, we have double the flight crew we need at the moment, and that's we would like to see them put to good use. But yes, maybe Phil's got something to add to that.
And Phil, and I'm just bearing in mind the time, we're going to have to wind it up fairly soon. But over to you, Phil.
Yeah, very briefly, I reject the question about exposure risk. We do a lot of tracking of exposure risk, and we turn it into a rate. Obviously, there's a bit of a lag because we can't get the statistics out of the Bureau of Transport and Resource Economics in time to be more timely than we'd like. But we have managed to drive down the exposure, particularly on fatalities, since the late 90s, and we've driven it down by a huge amount. We've driven that down 1,000 hours flown from a figure of somewhere between 4 to 5, and these are figures that include fire, but are also including ag, because they're the only available taxonomy we've got. And we've driven those down now to an annual result of either 0 fatalities or 1 to 2 fatalities. That's a fairly significant decrease. How have we done that? Largely through improved aircraft safety, but also through human factors training. We know that on 80% of accidents, it's human factors that are involved in it in some way or another. So the training is an issue, but it goes to the heart of what Ray is saying. The pilot might be at the pointy end, but there's a lot of decision makers, influencers, and people willing to put pressure, as even if they think it's not pressure, it might be perceived as pressure, and that results in bad outcomes. So whilst we're doing CRM training busily with pilots, where's the CRM training for the agency taskers, the agency incident management teams, and so on? And we really need to ramp up that training so that we're all on the same hymn book, not just the pilots who have done CRM or TRM, whatever you want to call it, crew resource management training. So I think that's part of the answer, is if you're going to put more aircraft inshore, but make everyone on the same page in terms of competence and an understanding of safety risk.
Thanks, Phil, and thanks, Ray. I've got some other questions which we're not going to have time to go through on the webinar, but Tim Edwards has asked why aircraft don't work from first light and do pilot changes during the day, highlighting that lost opportunity. Kang Yo Lee is asking what missions do the aircraft do after March, and do aircraft get deployed into other countries? Nick Ryan and Tim Verco are both talking about the market and whether in fact the market is an uneven and equal market. What we'll do is we'll take those questions and put them to our two speakers and make sure that they go up in the post after the webinar has finished. But we're out of time. I'd like to firstly thank everyone who has subscribed to today's webinar. Again, really good numbers, and that shows a great deal of interest. I'd like to acknowledge and thank our two speakers, Phil Hurst from the 4A and Ray Cronin from the Australian Helicopter Industry Association. Thank you for two provocative, informative presentations, both of which will help us shape the question provided by Chris Arnold about what do we want tomorrow to look like. Thank you to all who have joined. A reminder of the upcoming webinar on Thursday, the 3rd of September, where Richard Alder will speak to the survey results, Josephine Sterling on diversity, Vicky Campbell on the incident controller's view, and Stuart Ellis on the National Aerial Firefighting Strategy. And then I might have made a mistake about the interactive workshop. It's actually not on the 27th, it's on the 17th of September. So mark that in your diary, and we look forward to inviting you all to and seeing you all at that webinar. And again, just a closing reminder that this webinar has been recorded, and then after the webinar is finished, we'll advise a link so you can access the PowerPoint presentation and the recording and the questions. So once again, thank you very much, and we look forward to talking with you all on the 3rd of September. Thank you.